She realized too late that the real punishment would not be the blow that struck her down, but the moment every eye in Valhalla turned away from her as if she had already ceased to exist. It began with a pause, one heartbeat of hesitation on a battlefield that had seen 1,000 deaths before. Dawn and would see 1,000 more before evening. She hovered above the carnage, her horse formed of mist and storm, her spear gleaming with the light of a sky that did not belong to mortals. Below her, men screamed, prayed, cursed, and bled in the mud. Their souls rose like faint sparks whenever a chest stopped heaving, each spark waiting for judgment. For centuries she had been swift and precise. Odin's voice would press against her thoughts, a quiet command wrapped in the certainty of a god who believed himself above doubt. Take that one. Leave that one. He dies in fear. He is not mine. He dies with fury. Bring him home. She had obeyed without question because that was what Valkyries were made to do. Choose, but only within boundaries drawn by someone else's will. But on that day, one spark rose brighter than the rest. It did not rise from the fiercest warrior or the last man standing in a shield wall. It rose from a soldier who had turned his back on glory to drag a wounded comrade toward safety, ignoring his captain's order to hold the line. He did not die with a roar, only a hoarse whisper, his final breath spent not on Odin's name but on the friend he refused to abandon. The spark of his soul flickered, fragile and stubborn at once, and she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before: disagreement. This man was not what Odin usually wanted. He had disobeyed orders, broken formation, chosen loyalty over victory. Useful men rallied others to fight again. Men like this sometimes stopped battles before they could be harvested. And yet as she watched his fading light tremble, she knew with a clarity sharper than any spear point that he was worthy of something more than being ground into the gears of another war. She reached for him. The air thickened. A pressure she knew all too well pressed against the back of her skeleton's will, cold and precise. Not that one. Oh, the command didn't come as a shout. It never did. It slid through her mind like a knife wrapped in velvet, polite and absolute. She froze, her horse stamped on empty sky, uneasy. The soul hung between her fingers and the earth, caught at the edge of being pulled upward or left to sink into whatever lesser fate awaited him. For a moment she did what every Valkyrie had done for ages. She tried to bend her own judgment around the god's command, to convince herself that he saw further, knew more, that there was some hidden reason this man must be denied. But the battlefield below did not care about divine strategy. It only reflected what had really happened. A man had chosen to die so that someone else might live. No saga would name him, no skald would sing of him. Odin would not claim him. And in that single heartbeat of hesitation she felt something inside herself crack. Why she dared to think not in prayer but in challenge. Why not him? The pressure sharpened like an icy hand closing around her throat. Because he is inconvenient, came the unspoken answer. Because mercy spreads. Because men who die for each other instead of for me weaken the hunger that feeds this hall. Take another. Leave him. This was the rule no mortal ever heard in the Tales. Valhalla was not filled only with the brave. It was filled with the useful. Warriors whose deaths could be turned into future wars. Leaders whose stories inspired sons to bleed. Men whose rage outlived their bodies. Those who were too gentle, too questioning, too inclined to protect rather than destroy. Those were often left behind, their fates scattered into obscurity. She had always felt the edge of this truth but never dared to look at it directly, until now. The soul pulsed again, calling to her with a wordless plea that was not a demand for glory, only a refusal to be discarded. She realized that if she obeyed, she would be complicit in something she could no longer pretend not to see. That thought was worse than Odin's anger. For the first time in an age she chose against him. Her fingers closed around the soul. She pulled. It rose entirely into her grasp, light settling into her palm like a coal that refused to go out. The pressure in her mind exploded into rage. You defy me? The sky split with distant thunder. Ravens wheeled above her, black eyes glittering with their master's fury. Her horse reared, fighting the invisible weight pressing down on them. She felt 1,000 bonds tighten inside her, the threads that linked her to Valhalla, to the storm, to the other Valkyries who still obeyed without hesitation. Those threads had once felt like strength. Now they felt like shackles. He is worthy, she said aloud, though no mortal could hear her. Whether his death profits you or not, the wind died. The ravens went still in the air, wings outstretched but motionless, as if time itself had stumbled. Somewhere far above, in the high seat of Asgard, Odin's single eye turned fully toward her. For a heartbeat she thought he would smash her out of existence where she hovered. But the Allfather's punishments were rarely clean. Death was simple. His preferred weapon was worse: erasure. The first blow landed not on her body, but on her certainty. The bond that had always guided her steps, an instinct that told her where to fly, who to see, which souls were meant for Valhalla, vanished. It was as if someone had blown out a lamp that had burned in her chest for as long as she could remember. Suddenly the sky felt too large, the world too quiet. She clutched the soul tighter, feeling both of them drift in a space where the usual rules had gone thin. Below her, the battle raged on. No one knew that a line had been crossed in the unseen realm above their heads. No one heard the first quiet tearing sound as one Valkyrie slipped out of the script written for her. The second blow came as silence from the hall she had served. Valhalla dimmed at the edges of her sense. Once she could always feel it, a constant hum of noise, steel, laughter, and hunger waiting for more. Now that hum retreated, muffled, as if a door had been slammed shut. The other Valkyries, distant lights in the weave of fate, flickered in alarm. None of them turned fully toward her. The bonds between them tightened as if her doubt were a disease that could spread if they even acknowledged it. That was how Odin kept his chosen in line, not just through his own will, but through the fear of becoming the one no one dared to remember. You wanted to know what happened to Valkyries who questioned Odin, though no saga ever tells it plainly. They were not struck down with fanfare. They were not dragged in chains before the hall as public examples. Their punishments were quieter, crueler, designed not to end them but to unmake them. First, their purpose was stripped, then their place, then their name. She felt the first of those being taken from her even as she turned away from the battlefield with the forbidden soul held close. The wind no longer rushed to carry her. The clouds no longer parted in deference. She flew not as an extension of the storm, but as something heavier, slower, suddenly aware of gravity. And somewhere behind that silence, behind the closing gates of Valhalla, a decision was forming in Odin's mind. She would not merely be punished. She would become a warning that no one was allowed to see. She did not fall immediately. Odin rarely rushed the end of anything he intended to control. Instead, she drifted, cut loose from the currents that had once carried her without thought. The sky no longer recognized her as its own. Thunder rolled far away, indifferent, and the storm she had once ridden like a limb of her body now treated her as an intruder. Below, Midgard stretched wide and raw, fields torn apart by boots and blades, rivers choked with blood that would sink into the soil and be forgotten by winter. For the first time she sensed the world the way mortals always had, heavy, slow, indifferent to intention. The soul in her grasp glowed faintly, warming her palm like something alive and fragile. Without Valhalla's call to pull it from her, she felt its weight not as burden but as responsibility. That was Odin's second punishment, choice. Valkyries were never meant to choose alone. Their judgment had always been shaped, guided, narrowed until their apparent freedom flowed neatly inside the Allfather's design. Now that guidance was gone. No path lit itself before her. No instinct whispered where to go. The future no longer arranged itself into efficient lines. Every direction felt equally uncertain. To a being trained for destiny, uncertainty was agony. She tried to feel the other Valkyries again, to reach through the old channels that had bound them into a single, efficient consciousness. The attempt came back empty. Worse than emptiness, resistance. Where connection had once flowed effortlessly, there was now a dull pressure, like scars grown over a wound. Odin had not simply silenced her, he had sealed her off, making it dangerous for others to even acknowledge her existence. To look at her too closely would invite the same punishment. In Valhalla, obedience did not require cruelty. Fear of disappearance was enough. The soul stirred. She realized then what Odin would do next. He would not waste energy hunting her. He would let the structure correct itself. Every realm stretched thin by endless conflict had a use for expendable lives. A Valkyrie without a hall, without a name, without protection was exceedingly vulnerable. If she fell to monsters or mortals or the slow erosion of time, the problem would solve itself. No story would record it. No echo would reach Asgard. Erasure did not require violence when neglect could do the work more cleanly. She turned away from the battlefield completely. The soul's presence guided her, not with command, but with memory. It radiated recollections of forests untouched by war, of hands steadying a plow instead of a shield, of nights where silence did not mean waiting for an attack. These were not the memories Odin valued. They did not produce armies or oaths or epic last stands. But they carried something else, endurance without conquest. This was the kind of life that made rulers nervous, because it did not need them. It took her longer than she expected to understand what she had become. She was no longer a Valkyrie in Odin's sense of the word, but neither was she mortal. The role she had been designed for had burned away, leaving something unfinished beneath. Where the machinery of fate no longer dictated her movement, she felt a strange, aching openness. The old certainty was gone, replaced by a weight she could not discard. Every soul she did not take would now face an unknown path. Every soul she chose to guard would change something subtle and irreversible in how the system functioned. This was the punishment Odin counted on to break her. Responsibility without authority. Without Valhalla, she could not shelter the soul in endless feasting and training. Without divine sanction, she could not rewrite its place in the cycle. All she could do was carry it for a while, protect it, guide it toward a future not owned by the All-Father, and eventually she would have to let it go, knowing that no god would intervene to clean up the consequences. Time changed around her. Days slid into seasons. Mortality pressed closer. She felt hunger for the first time, not for flesh, but for rest. Fatigue crept into her wings, once tireless. Odin had not bound her into a human body, but he had stripped away the infinite renewal that made immortality effortless. Each choice now accumulated. Each delay cost something. This was not mercy, it was calibration. Odin wanted her to understand exactly why his system existed, because bearing history without limit eventually crushed those who did. In Valhalla, the Einherjar trained on. They drank. They laughed. They prepared for an ending that always remained just out of reach. Odin did not speak of her again. Her name dissolved quietly from memory. Skalds who once might have sung of her deeds felt their tongues catch strangely when they tried to remember the number of Valkyries or their names or their faces. Something was missing. Nobody knew what, but absence leaves impressions. In scattered places across Midgard, warriors began to die without witnesses from above. Their souls passed on uncollected, moving into paths that did not bend cleanly toward Hell or Valhalla. Some lingered. Some dispersed. Some threaded into the living world in ways no saga could track. The system had lost a piece, not enough to collapse, but enough to misalign it. Odin noticed, of course. He always noticed inefficiency, but he did not correct it immediately. To do so would mean acknowledging her rebellion as meaningful. He would not offer that satisfaction. Instead, he adjusted pressure elsewhere. Wars sharpened. Prophecies darkened. The promise of Ragnarok flared brighter in mortal dreams, urging them to violence with renewed urgency. Odin compensated for loss by increasing demand. More war meant more souls. More souls masked small irregularities. From a distance, the figures still added up. Closer to the ground, however, something subtle shifted. Some warriors hesitated before charging. Some kings found themselves oddly unconvinced by victory at any cost. A handful of deaths felt heavier than they should have, as if someone had stood nearby and seen them not as assets but as ends in themselves. These moments changed nothing quickly. They were too quiet, too personal. But systems like Odin's did not change because of singular events. They eroded through accumulation. The Valkyrie carried the soul until the moment came to release it. There was no ceremony. No ascent through light. She simply loosened her hold and watched as it moved onward, lighter than before, unhindered by obligations it had never agreed to. When it vanished, she felt a hollow relief and a deeper sorrow entwined. She had not saved the world. She had not overturned a god. She had done something smaller and far more dangerous. She had proven that refusal was possible. That was the truth the sagas never recorded. Not that Valkyries were punished for questioning Odin. That part survived in fragments and warnings. But that at least one of them endured the punishment and continued anyway, stripped of glory, stripped of place, choosing function over obedience. Odin had demanded silence, disappearance, compliance. What he got was a leak in the myth. She did not return to Valhalla. She did not rise as a goddess. She remained between, carrying weight without reward, shaping nothing that could be easily named. Somewhere in that in-between space the story persisted, not as legend, but as pressure, as discomfort, as the sense that destiny was never as absolute as it pretended to be. And that is why the truth of Valhalla's punishments was never sung loudly. Because once you know that even a Valkyrie could refuse, the entire structure trembles. She became what the old stories never knew how to name. Not outlaw, not rebel, not fallen. Those words belonged to systems that still tracked who stood inside and who had been cast out. What she became existed beyond that ledger. Odin had stripped away her rank, her function, her audience, believing that anonymity would dissolve her will. What he underestimated was what remains when structure is removed but awareness remains. Intact. Memory. Without Valhalla's noise, without the endless rhythm of war drills and feasts, she heard history clearly for the first time, not as heroic arcs but as residue. Each conflict left something behind that no battle song could absorb. Unburied fear, inherited violence, habits of obedience passed from parent to child. She began to understand the true economy Odin had built. He did not rule through terror alone. He ruled through repetition. The same patterns rehearsed until they felt inevitable. And inevitability was the easiest story to sell. She walked unseen through villages rebuilt atop older ruins. She watched children play at war with sticks already shaped like swords. She listened to elders recount victories with pride while never speaking of what had followed them home. Odin's mythology did not need constant maintenance. It was self-propagating. Once belief took root, mortals themselves did much of the work. That was why Odin had never needed to destroy her publicly. A spectacular punishment creates martyrs. A quiet one creates doubt that cannibalizes itself. Other Valkyries felt her absence like one feels a missing tooth after the tongue keeps returning to the gap. But they could not speak of it. The structure rewarded unnoticing. The ones who noticed learned to look away. Still, she left traces. In places where war should have ignited cleanly, it hesitated. A treaty collapsed more slowly than expected. An insult landed but did not fracture immediately into bloodshed. These were not miracles. They were delays. But delays mattered. Delays created space, and space allowed memory to surface where ideology had once dominated. Odin sensed the interference not as rebellion but as noise. His machinery still functioned. Valhalla remained full. Ragnarok still loomed as justification. Yet something had shifted in tone. Warriors arrived more brittle. Some carried regret that did not burn away under endless training. Some struggled to forget they had died trying to protect rather than conquer. Valhalla could contain bodies. Containing meaning was harder, he responded, as gods always do when systems falter, by tightening narratives. Battles grew louder in the stories, heroes grew more exaggerated, glory became sharper, bloodier, more absolute. Skalds leaned harder into inevitability, into destiny as comfort. The promise was simple: do not think too much. Do not linger on doubt. There is a place prepared for you where everything will make sense. But certainty, once cracked, does not reseal cleanly. Some Valkyries now delayed a fraction too long. Some felt the weight of choosing and understood that what they felt was not weakness but ethics. Odin watched, recalculated, corrected as best he could. Yet he did not dare repeat the punishment publicly. Doing so would confirm the existence of the very doubt he worked to erase. And so the untold punishments of Valhalla remained untold. Not because they were unknown, but because to speak them plainly would reveal that the system depended on silence more than obedience. The missing Valkyrie never returned, yet she never truly vanished. Her influence was not a banner raised against Odin, but grit introduced into the gears of fate. Small, annoying, persistently undeniable. The kind of disruption no prophecy accounted for, because prophecy assumes closure. She embodied the possibility that even within myth, refusal had existed. Not triumphant refusal. Not heroic rebellion, but weary, informed refusal, the kind that does not seek to overturn gods only to stop feeding them unquestioningly. If Valhalla is ever challenged, it will not be by armies or flames. It will be by unrewarded questions asked at the wrong time, by choices made without witnesses, by figures history tried to erase but failed to eliminate completely. That is what happened to Valkyries who questioned Odin. They were not destroyed. They were made into blind spots. And blind spots, left unattended, grow. If this story unsettles you, it is because myths are not meant to be comfortable when examined too closely. They are meant to function. And when someone learns how they function, truly learns it, they become dangerous, not because they shout, but because they no longer play their assigned role. There are many such roles still written into old stories, still repeated without question. This was only one crack. But every machine ends not with collapse, but with accumulation of cracks no one wants to name. And once you notice them, you cannot stop seeing where the next one will form. The story does not close with fire, or with a throne overturned, or with Odin brought low by rebellion. That ending would have been too tidy, too comforting. Myths prefer spectacle when they want to be forgiven. What remained instead was something far more uncomfortable. Continuation. Valhalla still stands in the stories. Warriors still imagine its gates opening at the moment of death. Odin's name is still spoken with reverence, fear, and admiration. From a distance, nothing appears to have changed. That is how systems of power survive their first fractures. They absorb disruption without acknowledging it, presenting continuity as proof of righteousness. But beneath the surface, the shape of obedience is never quite the same once it has been questioned. Somewhere in the machinery of fate, calculations began to require adjustment. A soul did not arrive when it should have. Another came altered, carrying memories that refused to be polished into glory. A Valkyrie hesitated long enough for uncertainty to mark her, even if she continued her work afterward. These moments did not stop the cycle. They made it noisier, less efficient, less clean. Odin built Valhalla to be inevitable. The punishment of those who questioned him was meant to reinforce that inevitability by removing doubt from the visible world. What he could not fully eliminate was the residue of seeing too clearly. Once a being understands that destiny is administered rather than ordained, the language of inevitability loses its grip. The Valkyrie who defied him did not become a heroine in a hidden saga, nor a warning whispered openly among the ranks. She became absence given shape. A reminder felt, but not spoken. Her punishment succeeded in the way Odin intended. No revolt followed, but it failed in the way he did not predict. It revealed that compliance, not rebellion, was the true foundation of Valhalla. And compliance depends on belief remaining unexamined. The sagas never recorded her because sagas preserve function, not friction. They survive by simplifying. Gods are elevated. Warriors are purified. Structures are justified by endings that promise meaning. Stories that threaten that function are smoothed away until only their pressure remains. That pressure is what lingers now. Whenever a story of glory feels too clean, too eager to turn suffering into virtue, whenever honor is invoked to silence grief, whenever destiny is used as an excuse rather than an explanation, those are the places where her absence presses hardest. It's not as proof, but as unease. The untold punishments of Valhalla were never meant to frighten mortals. They were designed to discipline servants. But punishment carries memory even when stories do not. And memory, once loose, does not stay contained within halls, gods, or myths. If this account feels heavier than legend, it is because legends are engineered to float. This story sinks. It asks what must be removed to make Valhalla shine, and who paid that cost without their name ever being spoken. The Valkyrie who questioned Odin was punished, erased, isolated, and left without reward, and still she changed the shape of the story. Not by winning, but by refusing to disappear completely. That is often how the deepest fractures begin, not with thunder, but with silence that does not behave the way it was designed to. And once that silence exists, the myth is never whole again.